The big story, Syria. A Friday of rage, erupting in violence, dozens killed across the country at the hands of Syrian security forces. All of this according to direct reports on the ground, this as the president officially in our country imposes new sanctions. Good Friday afternoon to you. I am Dylan Radigan, and it is a busy one. Thousands of anti-government protesters today taking to the streets in Syria, calling for the downfall of President Assad and chanting support for the besieged city of Daraa. Amateur video that we found posted on the web purportedly documenting deadly clashes, these between Syrian protesters and Syrian security forces. Abundant gunfire and chaos rippling throughout the country. This particular video said to show tear gas fired on protesters in the capital city of Damascus as they came out of a mosque following Friday prayers. Now, 6 weeks into the uprising, it is believed more than 450 people have been killed by the Syrian government. And this afternoon, word is that President Obama has officially stepped up U.S. pressure on the Syrian regime, imposing new sanctions against Syrian intelligence and relatives of President Bashar Assad, although nothing against President Assad himself. And that, my friends, is just Syria. Meantime, new developments in Libya. The fighting now reportedly crossing, albeit briefly, into the immediately adjacent nation of Tunisia. You remember them, the original revolution, and as a result, potential power vacuum existing adjacent to Libya. Gaddafi forces said to have been driven out of Tunisia by the Tunisian military. Libyan rebels also clashing with pro-Gaddafi forces over control of a border crossing between Tunisia and Libya. And those rebels are now said to have the upper hand there. We begin our coverage with Richard Engel, who is in Libya at this hour in Benghazi. And before we get to the issues at the Tunisian border, Richard, can you tell us anything more about what precisely is going on in Syria and whether there is any sense of just how far the Syrian government is willing to go in the way of slaughtering its own people to deal with this?
It's become very clear that this is a full-scale military crackdown in Syria and that the Syrian government has decided it will not accept any demonstrations. Today was supposed to be a day of rage, and after Friday prayers, demonstrators left the mosque and Syrian security forces fired on them. Most of the people who were killed, and according to human rights groups, there are anywhere from a dozen to 42 people killed today, were Syrian demonstrators who were trying to enter the city of Daraa. The city of Daraa in southern Syria has been surrounded by security services for the last several days. And as the people tried to break this cordon around the city, that's when they were shot.
And then in Libya, where you find yourself tonight, there is the additional variable of the neighboring Tunisia. And I think so many of us in America are not only learning our Middle Eastern geography on a country-by-country basis, but realizing the proximity so many of these countries share and how the destabilization of one nation, in this case the Tunisian revolution, you can see that little red strip there as an immediate adjacency to Libya. What exactly is going on at that border crossing?
You can see why the borders, if you're looking at a map right now, are so important. Muammar Gaddafi's regime has already lost control of the Egyptian border. We entered from Egypt, weapons come in from Egypt, humanitarian supplies come in from Egypt, and the rebels control at least one external border, that is the border to Egypt, cutting it off from the regime in Tripoli. The only other major trading border or external border along the Mediterranean coast is that of Tunisia. And several days ago, the rebels were able to gain a foothold on that border and open up a new supply line. Earlier today, Gaddafi's forces were fighting with the rebels right in that border region, which is so crucial to the regime, and apparently accidentally crossed over into Tunisia. It may have been an issue of hot pursuit. They might not have realized that they had actually crossed into Tunisia. Once they got inside, and we're talking about just over a dozen Libyan armored vehicles or pickup trucks, they're called technicals with machine guns on top of them, the Libyan army and National Guard mobilized, drove them out and sent them back into Libya. And fighting, as you mentioned, is still ongoing between the rebels and Gaddafi's forces for control of part of the Libyan-Tunisian border.
Understood. Listen, Richard, thank you as always for your reporting.